All right. Hi, everybody. It's October 10th, 2024, and this is the weekly Backdrop Dev meeting. We get together every week to talk about development priorities for Backdrop CMS. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm Quick Sketch on the Internet core committer and technical lead for the Backdrop project. We've got a little group here today, just four of us, but we'll go around and introduce ourselves. We'll start with Martin, and then we'll go to Eli.
Hello, I'm Martin Price, Yorkshire Pudding around the internet, and I'm a backdrop developer for System Horizons in Northeast England, United Kingdom.
Thanks, Martin. Eli, and then Tim.
Hello, my name is Eli Lissick. I'm a developer for Giant Rabbit calling from San Diego, California.
Thanks, Eli. And Tim?
I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim on the internet, and I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota today. That's all.
Great. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Let's see. We usually start things off with a little update on the world of Contrib, and we had one new module released this week. Tim actually is the porter, I believe, the gtranslate module, which is a funny module that is oft requested by clients, but yeah, I'm not sure if we need to have any other commentary on gtranslate module, but it's great that we have it available. It's always good to have options.
Well, I'll just say that it was my colleagues who ported it, not me directly.
Oh, okay.
I'm listed as a maintainer, so.
Yeah, I saw Triplo, and in my mind that means Tim, but not accurate. All right, let's see. And for big news this week, we had a release. We had the release of Backdrop 129.1. It came out on Sunday as we planned last week. And the Backdrop 126 or 129.1 release only had four bug fixes in it, none of which were very significant except for 6717, which it was the downloading of translation files wasn't working in the 129 release, which was one of the main features of Backdrop 129. So that's why we wanted to get that release out. I did see that Luke wrote a blog post for the release of Backdrop 129, but it hasn't been published yet. It would be a great time to go in and edit that blog post. It looks like we still need some screenshots in there. But now that 129.1 is out and the main new feature of 129 is now working, it'd be a great time to start promoting that new capability. So thank you, Luke, for doing that, but we still need to do a little bit of work there to get that out. Let's see. Tim, do you want to mention anything about upcoming events? I guess we have got the community meeting right after this one, but
well, it would be good to mention it in the stream, the recording. The big one, well, there are two, obviously. Bad Camp. I don't have the dates in my head. That must just be a week or two.
Yeah, it is October 24th and 25th.
Okay, so October, about 2 weeks. At Bad Camp, there's going to be a Backdrop Summit. We have at least a couple of backdroppers there. If you're in the Bay Area and can make it to Bad Camp, for sure. If you're not in the Bay Area, it may be worth going. Good time to go hang out there. And again, we do have we're on the schedule for a full 3-hour morning mini camp or summit, Backdrop Summit. So I have to double check with Irina where we're at on programming, but she's been lining up some people for the program for that, and I hope to do a little bit of sprinting, I think, during Bad Camp as well. And then
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I saw that Zach Chandler is probably going to be presenting from Stanford again on the Stanford case study, which is always a fantastic topic. Yeah, I registered just yesterday, in fact, so of course I'll be there as well. Yeah, and Tim, and it sounds like you're planning on coming out also, right?
No, I don't think I'm going to be able
to. Fiddles. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for organizing.
I minimal. This has been Irina's really taken the lead. I've just sort of talked to her and helped her out a bit. So Yeah, but what I've been working on is the Backdrop Live, which is like a month later. The dates quickly are the 14th and 15th of November. It was scheduled, actually, it would have been, I think, today. But we postponed it. We were a little bit behind in planning. So we actually got ahead of the curve. And I would say a month out, we're probably as good as we've ever been in terms of planning Backdrop. We have we've got some good registrations coming in, and our schedule is really way ahead of where it usually is. So good news there. I mean, I think this could be our best Backdrop Live ever. So get that on your schedule. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, nice hype there.
We're always looking for topics. So if there's things you want covered, if there's discussions you're willing to host, please let us know. That's all.
Great. All right. Well, we didn't have any other specific issues to talk about today. So aside from the release of Backdrop 129.1, I wanted to turn an eye to Backdrop 1.30, which is exciting for a lot of reasons. That comes out January 15th. That will be, of course, a nice round number, 130, but it's also the 10-year anniversary of Backdrop releases. So, I mean, Backdrop got started in 2013, but 2015 was the first official release of Backdrop 1.0. And yeah, we've got the 10-year anniversary coming up. There's some other thoughts and plans about what we can do to celebrate Backdrop 1.30. Unfortunately, I think what everybody would like to see the most would be new themes, but I'm really not sure that that's a viable thing for us because there's nothing out there that is just like sitting and ready or a strong initiative to pursue a new theme, and a new theme takes a huge amount of effort and a real advocate and capable person to lead it, and I don't think that we have that at this moment. There's some vague thought about Djinn. You know, Djinn is an excellent admin theme. That's probably the closest thing we have to like an admin theme revamp. But I'm not sure that that's really in the cards either. So for other ways to celebrate Backdrop 1.30, it may be more like marketing driven. And not represented so much in the software, and the software probably will continue to do it, what it always does, which is iterative improvement.
Do we think that Wes Roof's work on dark mode for the 7 theme would be, because that would be, I mean, it's not a whole new theme, but being able to switch to dark mode it is a bit of a wow feature for the admin side.
That could be fun. You're right that that's viable. The 7 theme dark mode capability works great, generally speaking, for general stuff. The problem that we have is that there's a lot of UIs that provide a lot of their own color coding, including the layout UI and the views UI specifically. And the specific modules that provide their own colors, color coding, need to also have some kind of dark mode support, which is still possible. It would be interesting to conceptually convert this from like 7 specifically having a dark mode to dark mode being a generally core supported feature, because that's kind of what we're talking about, where it's like it can't be just the theme, it also needs to be all of the modules, at least that provide administrative interfaces. So that's the trick there on that one. It's possible though.
Yep. Can I go back to the theme thing and say that there were 2 sort of sub ideas that I think could still be possible. One of which was a refresh of backdrop.org, so not the product, but in celebration of the anniversary. I think that may still be possible, although it's getting tight. But another thing that I think might be totally realistic if we got going now would be to settle this issue about how to do updates to Basis, and get that in along with like some fixes to Basis, and maybe even it would be possible to do sort of a slight refresh of Basis where, sort of a different color scheme, or, so it would be fairly minor, will only affect new sites, and it might freshen up Basis without it being an entire new theme.
Yep.
That idea has been mentioned, and we'd have to get going pretty quickly here to make that happen, but I think it's still possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That would also be like very nice to to figure out.
Right. I think the first step would be really just to figure out what that means. What would a slight refresh to Basis be, and see if we can get somebody with some design skills to make a few suggestions. So
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to get into that topic
Yeah.
again, because there's so
That's
many
okay.
ideas that have been floated for how to solve that problem. I think
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
we leave that one to the issue to continue that discussion. Do you happen to know what the number is of that one?
I don't, but what
Uh,
I would say in terms of a summary is I think that Jen has an idea about, I mean, it seems to me until we have a practical PR, that it's hard for us to move forward because, and I think I've had the impression that Jen has an idea of which direction she'd like to go, and has several times said she just needs some, to find the time to
yeah,
help with
okay.
that. And maybe we can get somebody else working, maybe we can talk to her, figure out what that, I think it was either supplemental style sheets or supplemental CSS,
Yeah, it's
selectors.
4512.
Okay.
Yeah, supplemental style sheets to basis.
So do you think that's the leading, like, I see, I'm less convinced that we have like a settled solution, but it would be nice if we could just sort of settle around one, because then maybe somebody else could help work on that.
Okay, yeah, and there's a separate one. The best way to make improvements to the CSS without breaking existing sites, and that's 4170 or 4167, which is kind of that's like the more meta issue,
Right.
and then the other one is specifically like this is a particular solution for Basis.
Yeah, and I think there's actually there might even be a couple other, I'm sure there are a couple other options out there that have been discussed. I'm sorry, say again the one that you, the first mentioned, the solution.
Uh,
The first issue number.
4512
4512.
is supplemental CSS for Basis,
Yeah,
and
I
then
think
4167 is best way to make improvements to CSS without breaking existing sites.
right.
So that's like the more meta, like let's figure out this general problem.
That supplemental CSS one, I think is sort of the leading contender. So
yeah, both of those are good candidates. All right. Yeah, some more issues that I'm seeing in the 1.30 realm. There's the really obvious, evident one right in front of us to update CKEditor again. CKEditor is constantly moving, and we're now 1, 2, 3, 4 releases behind CKEditor, even though we just had a release last month. And IndigoZilla has a pull request over in issue 6695. And I think we discussed this before, that merging in CKEditor updates early in the release cycles is a good idea, just because we have a longer testing period. But it does also mean that we'll probably end up updating CKEditor multiple times before the 1.30 release comes out. So that one has a pull request. It's ready to go, gets us up to the very latest version, 43.2. And yeah, that just needs some eyeballs and some testing. And then Martin kindly came through and made a couple of suggestions for the 1.30 release as like potential issues. and I appreciated him putting these forwards. First of all, there's the one that Martin you're working on right now, which is the simplified array syntax for settings.php, where we make it so that settings.php, instead of using a string for the database connection, starts using an array, but still simplified down from what Drupal uses, but also has the really nice benefit of turning on UTF-8 MB4 support by default, which I'm pretty keen on. So I think that issue is in good condition. It's 2231. And Martin, just before the recording, I'd asked if you would be willing to advocate for that one, and then we can put it into the 130 milestone.
Yeah.
So that's great. That one's coming along pretty nicely. One that doesn't have an issue, or sorry, doesn't have a pull request yet, that is a good candidate for 1.30 is another one that Martin brought up, which is including fast token browser in core to make it so that when you open up the token browser, instead of loading literally every token in the entire system all at once, we take the contrib module fast token browser and integrate it into core. And that makes it so that when you open up the modal for the token browser, it only loads the top level. And then as you drill down, it Ajax loads each one of the children. And that can substantially speed up the rendering of the token browser for the initial load. And it can also much more gracefully handle tokens that end up with really deeply nested stuff, or even potentially recursive tokens. But I'd still think we should avoid that. But it's a good concept and good feature. These kind of modules where it's like take what's in contrib and put it into core, like coreify the contrib module, are always like really good candidates. Really follows some of our original principles about reducing the cost of ownership, that you don't have to go and find every contrib module, and the core maintenance cycle is generally right now, I think, more trusted and more stable than contrib modules. And so as core takes on these responsibilities and just gives you the features instead of needing to download, dozens of modules on every site, it's all just there for you. And so this is a great example of that. The issue is 6143 for fast token browser in core. But great candidate, but it doesn't have an advocate and it doesn't have a pull request. So yeah, definitely some work to be done there, but I like that it's one of these like kind of straight shot kind of features. All right. And lastly, kind of on the same vein of like take it from contrib and put it into core. This week, I've personally been looking at issue 2409, which is add backup and migrate functionality to core, which is another good example of that. We have really good contrib solutions, really strongly proven solutions for backing up SQL into a backup file through backup and migrate, and also through demo module. And the thing that I'd like to focus on for this particular issue is taking the API from backup and migrate or from demo. But I looked at both of the two options, backup and migrate and demo module. They're really kind of similar in the way that they export a MySQL database to a file. But considering backup and migrate has more usage, and it's also been updated more recently, and it has like a longer history. I think backup and migrate, like just choosing between the two of them, backup and migrate is probably the better starting point for taking an API and putting it into core. So starting from the API of backup and migrate, we can take that, turn it into core, or coreify it, turn it into a core API, and then focus on using that API in what I think is if you read the issue, there's some contention about backup and migrate user interfaces in core. But if we put it to use in the most universally accepted manner, then it will be less contentious. And that universally accepted manner would be having it be a part of the update process. So when you visit update.php, instead of presenting a user with this giant wall of text saying, you should back up your config, you should back up your database, make sure you do this, this is dangerous. We can instead replace that with a checkbox or a step that it just says, back up my stuff. And then you wouldn't have to provide them with all of these instructions because it would just be done for you. And what I really like about the concept here of integrating in backups to the update process is this is in many ways a prerequisite or just a smart thing to do first before we get to automatic updates. Because if an automatic update doesn't also have an automatic backup, then you're kind of setting yourselves up for an unrecoverable like situation. If the update fails and you don't have a backup, then you're in a really bad spot. So I took this 2409. I've already started doing some code work on it, but it's not pull request ready yet. I did put myself in as the advocate for this issue though, and put it into the 1.30 milestone. Want to also just share my screen just to.
So yeah, maybe you're getting there, but my question was, are you? I think I read your stuff on it, but are you thinking primarily that it's just an API? In your first draft, would there be a create backup button in that update process?
Yeah, this is
Okay, go ahead.
primarily what I'm thinking about. These screenshots that Klonos put in here, where we add a step into update.php that is make a backup. And I'm not sure if it'll actually look like this.
Right.
It could also be a checkbox, that is like before you go. But I think adding a step right here is probably a good one where you click take a backup, it gives you a progress bar while it makes the backup, and then it goes through the rest of the process. Also, what I'd like to see in here, I think I posted a comment on this, is so I'd like to have it be part of update.php to make a new backup. So there'd be a general API, and update.php would leverage the new API for making a SQL backup and a config backup. And then possibly, this is like a stretch goal, I'd like to have a capability to restore a backup too. But it wouldn't be a part of the admin UI that, like backup and migrate and demo module both allow you, you log in and then it's guarded by permissions through the normal backdrop permission system. Does the user have the ability to restore backups or not? And that's making a lot of assumptions that your site is working, that you can log in, that the session system and the database is loaded and stuff like that. And it's also exposing pretty dangerous functionality to your everyday administrators. And so that's what's been contentious about the backup and migrate functionality, specifically like the user interfaces for making the backups and stuff like that, putting them into just the normal admin UIs is where a lot of people are concerned. And so my suggestion here is that we make a new core file, kind of like install.php or update.php, called restore.php. And it would give you, this kind of user interface that lets you restore from your backup list. So it would be just like the installer or update.php, probably show you a list of your backups, and then you can select one and then load it. And the reason why I want to make it a separate file is because then it would be in line with our other conventions, guarded by a settings.php value. So it'd be like I don't have it in here, but it would be like, there's like update access equals true in settings.php. There would be like restore access equals true in settings.php. So restore.php would be locked all of the time unless you specifically unlocked it via settings.php. And then that way, it's not coupled to user sessions or even the database functioning. Restore.php should be able to function with a totally broken, non-functional backdrop website. So you should even be able to throw a backup in there from somewhere else and then restore it if you want to do that. But you have to first enable it through settings.php. But that would allow you to restore even into an empty database, for example. And that avoids all of our concerns about putting it into the normal admin UI, and it also makes it the most robust solution for fixing a broken backdrop website. If something went catastrophically wrong, it can be restored with zero backdrop functionality working, even in totally empty database.
Well, are you thinking, Nate, that this would just maintain a single, like one backup at a time, or would there be the app? Are you thinking it might keep more than one backup?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
My initial thinking was more than one backup, probably.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't really feel strongly about one backup versus multiple backups.
I think probably the big concern about more than one backup is the UI, but if we're kind of avoiding the UI issue, then it doesn't really matter that much, right? If it's because if when you say store more than one backup, that just means there's more than one, in wherever the storage location is, but we're not really providing any UI to access those, so there's no complexity there.
Yeah, undecided really about, I mean, there will be the UI of restore.php.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
so restore.php can look in your backups directory and it could show just from the file directory listing the available backups. Yeah. Well, another aspect of this where I'm thinking with this, I haven't looked at the export um like archive of backup and migrate yet. Um, but what I'd like to see is probably we would export a config export and we would export a SQL dump. So a backup might actually be two files. And why I think that would be good is that if we leave our MySQL dump in a compatible format, then you could import it with other tools like MySQL admin or DDev or whatnot without needing to make a special like B command or something like that to import this special backup. Instead, there would just be the config backup, which is our normal config zip, and there would be a MySQL dump, which is a normal MySQL dump. And you would import both of those combined to achieve a backup or to achieve a restoration.
Okay.
I think that's kind of where I'm.
I wonder with the numbers of backups whether that would be a config setting where you'd say maximum number of say you set the maximum number as 3, that if you did each time you did a backup, it could check and then delete the oldest one if it was going to go over.
Yep, I think that would be good. Yeah, there is that question of like, should we group them somehow? And maybe the simple answer to that, I'm just spitballing because I haven't thought this far ahead, but we could use a directory for each backup, and inside the directory is the config and the MySQL file. And then, yeah, that way it would be clear that this config backup and this MySQL backup are related to each other, that they should go together. Because I could see having this low level ability, like end users might not find restore.php right away, but they might find the backups, and they might try to they might try to restore the backups manually in some way, like which you could do, use MySQL PHP myadmin to import the database, and then like just expand the zip file for the config and put the config directory in its place, both of which would work. But if you start mismatching one config backup with one database backup, things are going to go awry.
So if you're wrapping this stuff into core, are these things that you envision being like on by default and like taking multiple backups by default, or something someone would have to configure when they go to install Backdrop?
Yeah, that's a great question. The kind of thinking is that you would need to, or I'm not sure if you would need to. The way it would be controlled would be there would be a like backups directory, kind of like config directory, setting in settings.php, that you need to set to a particular location. And the most obvious available location on new installs would be the private files directory, because that's a protected location inside of the web root. Usually, I know it's not advised to put it inside of the web root, but it often is. Like Pantheon even requires it be inside of the web root, inside of sites default files, private. So the backups location would be specified as a directory, probably inside of the private directory by default. And if that directory was specified, then it would turn on the functionality. And if that directory is not specified, then it would turn off the functionality. And then update.php would probably advise you, if you want to turn on automatic updates, configure this. Otherwise, make a backup manually before proceeding. Does that make sense? So it'd be keyed off of a setting, the short version.
Yeah, that makes sense for me. I think that's a good midway between letting new people get at it easily and letting folks who like are already taking offsite backups to just not have that happen.
Yeah. And probably ultimately we would probably into the installer have a overall checkbox for install updates automatically. And if you check that box for install updates automatically, it would both configure a backups directory and turn on automatic updates. But if you didn't, then I think the default behavior for now would probably be automatic backups or backup functionality is not on by default. And I think that would also make, ease some concerns about having this functionality if it was totally just hidden and locked away, and the only way to turn it on was settings.php.
The core API, though, would be available for contrib modules to use without having to turn it on in settings.php.
Yep, that's what I'm. Yep. Yeah. So backup and migrate and demo module potentially could just start using the same backup and same restore capabilities, which could be nice.
And then I gave you the use case of recipes. Like if we had a recipes module that was helping you manage your recipes, it would be great to encourage people to take a backup before they installed a recipe, because.
Oh yeah. I hadn't thought about that as a just modules that do dangerous stuff.
Right.
Just saying, hey, I made a nice little button for you to back up your stuff from. And instead of recommending people install backup and migrate, the lightweight version could just be just make a backup and then link off to the documentation for how to restore it, instead of telling people to use backup and migrate.
Sure. I think like in the recipes case, I'd almost like it, give people the ability, I'd like to make it easier. But anyways, if there's any kind of restore API, then that could be the responsibility. If the recipes module wanted to do that, it could do it itself. I don't know if there would be a restore API, like you're talking about this restore.php file. I don't know if that would be the similar. Well, that would be using those functions that would be in an AP in core, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So backup and migrate is set up where a single class has like
Mhm.
a migrate, or sorry, a backup source. But a
Mhm.
backup source is also responsible for its own restoration. And so
Mhm.
the one class is
Mhm.
responsible for both the backup and for the restoring. And
Okay.
so yeah, that ability to restore would also be part of said API. Yep.
Okay. Good. Then, if we wanted to include that in the module, we could.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be interesting that we would like if the side effect of this would be lots of modules started having backup and migrate functionality rather than it being like more quarantined. More modules might decide that it's not very much work to provide their own user interfaces for backup and restore.
Mhm. Okay. I'm
Uh,
excited. I'm excited.
Mm.
yeah, I think does anybody have any concerns they want to float? I saw Joseph hopped in here and I'm not sure if his ears were burning because of this topic, but um yeah, I'd
I
like to hear any kind of concerns or suggestions if any of this sounds I don't know, too ambitious or dangerous or whatnot.
I think that if you're storing the backups within like the files directory and you have space limits, then on like a really large site, um, that could cause problems and because you might want to handle your backups external to the website entirely for that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there's some problems, and I think I should do some more research into backup and migrate to see how it's handled these sorts of problems of, backup and migrate has existed for 20 years,
Mhm.
and I think it's probably always had some limitations as to like when it stops being useful. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, that is a big question. Um, I do like that backup and migrate has a single flag for use MySQL dump instead. And so if you have MySQL dump available, it calls MySQL dump via command line, and then it doesn't use any PHP memory to do the dumping. And so I think that um, probably avoids a lot of the issues with backup and migrate to make it so that it could scale up a little bit bigger. But yeah, you're totally right that at a certain point, the backup's probably going to fail. Um, but that might kind of be okay, like if the backup step is before the run update.php step, if the backup fails, uh, and you reload the page, it says the backup failed. But then there's like the option to just skip it. You
Yeah.
could just skip the backup. But that almost makes it more explicit that um, you're proceeding without a net.
Yeah.
You
Mm.
know, right now, at least I've become very normalized to ignoring the warnings on
Yes.
update.php. And I'm like, it will probably be okay. And my last update was probably or my last backup was like last night's, and it's
Mhm.
like I can figure it out if it breaks, is
Mhm.
usually my attitude on my small sites.
Yeah.
And it would just be really great to have a backup
Mhm.
right at the time that the update was run. Um, oh
Mm.
yeah, I conceptually threw this out here too that this API, because we need a way to backup config and we need a way to backup the database, and it's the way that backup and migrate is written, that these things are classes for each backup source and backup/restore source. Um, that theoretically contrib modules could provide, I'm not sure how this would work, but theoretically contrib modules could provide an additional backup class that would make it so that you could back up with other mechanisms. Like you could, for example, make like a a Terminus backup module that used Terminus to initiate a Pantheon backup in the Pantheon dashboard. And so in the update.php process, when it says like create a backup, it's not using backdrop local files. Instead, it triggers a Terminus command to make a backup at your hosting level. And that's where it would store and potentially retrieve your backups from. And that way, yeah, you would end up having this nice functionality built into update.php that just, does that step for you in a way that you want it to work with your hosting.
Yeah. Thinking
oh,
about other limitations, a lot of shared hosting that I've seen has a limit to say you can only have one database backup in your file system at any one time. So that's where the idea of, well, I've already got a backup in my system and I'm doing an update, it should replace that existing backup because I've got a limit of one backup at any one time.
Yeah. Or you could overcome that limitation by using the backups provided by Backdrop, if you weren't opposed to saving them in a more accessible directory. Yeah.
I think I like what you said about locking the backdrop core backups behind some sort of like settings.php flag. But then when we're talking about contrib modules being able to access the backup system as like an API type of thing, I'm a little bit concerned about contrib modules then exposing that backup system to like overzealous admins that you might not want to be taking 20 backups of your site in a day type of thing. That would be something I would be concerned about.
Yeah. Well, it's almost certain that backup and migrate, if we take all of its API and put it into core, the backup and migrate would start using it. And so it wouldn't be much different than the system today, with the difference that modules wouldn't need to depend on backup and migrate to do the backup functionality. It's the same API, more or less. It's just that now it's in core instead of in contrib. And so it's like contrib. I could see kind of what you're saying though about like it would be more obvious if a module was going to be doing backup and restore functionality if it depended explicitly on backup and migrate. And something like recipe module, it might not be obvious that by turning on recipe module, it's exposing a pretty dangerous API to your admins. So I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's kind of from a perspective of like we have all of our own like kind of custom backup because we have like a bunch of staging sites that can be available to a client, like that sort of thing. And we don't want those getting backed up, so we don't use backup and migrate or anything. So that's kind of the context of that. Maybe suddenly being exposed where it wasn't before.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Eli, if you know the history on this, but that objection has been raised many times, which is why we're trying to do this in a way that for those developers and agencies that don't want this, we're implementing in a way that is as safe as it can be. So I hear that concern, and we need to, like as if my scenario with the recipe module, I don't know, maybe there's, to some extent, I don't want to make it impossible for people to do things like this, but we do need to provide adequate warnings and safeguards, and maybe that's just providing adequate warnings that any module that uses that API is, has an alert on the dashboard so that that people are so it's easy to identify that capacity is there, and it's easy to turn off if you don't want it.
I think we could have some way of like specifying only certain modules are allowed to use the backup system. Because if you only want backup and migrate to do it and you don't want 10 other modules that you may have installed for some other reason to try and create backups, you could just say only backup and migrate.
Sure. Yeah. I don't that this idea or this concept of like restricting APIs to certain locations seems a little strange
Mhm.
because I mean, there's so many dangerous things that can be done by a
Mhm.
contrib module very easily, like
Yeah.
execute raw PHP code.
Mhm.
And for a period of time, right, when we had PHP module or it was just built into filter module,
Mhm.
you could just run PHP in a text area and it's still built into Devel. And it used to be built into views too, that there was just like views had its own separate just execute arbitrary PHP text field. And there's nothing that we can do, I mean, other than discourage it like as a policy from
Mhm.
contrib modules to prevent them from doing dangerous stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, and I kind of feel like this is the case where it's like it's an API that has a lot of
Mhm.
danger, but so does
Mhm.
um, file unmanaged delete recursive, right? That you can recursively delete every file in the entire file system, and we don't restrict access to that function on a per module basis.
Yeah, I'll just point out we're almost out of time, or we are out of time.
But yeah, I guess I'm getting a little defensive, and I apologize about that. Um,
I'm with you, Nate. I want to be
Yeah, no, to
cautious,
be
but
clear,
not. Yeah.
I'm not, I hear that this has been discussed a lot. I'm not like against the idea of putting
Mhm.
this in. It's just something to be careful of, that's all.
yeah, totally. Yeah, that it's introducing yet another dangerous API into core.
Yeah, I think that with this one, it's more likely that a bunch of people are going to be like, "Oh, that's cool. I'll put it in my module."
I'm skeptical of that. I think we're overblowing the likelihood of this suddenly showing up in a lot of places.
I do think that Tim's likely to put it in recipe module, but but yeah, the ones that's obvious to me, demo module, recipe module, and backup and migrate,
Right.
which all do, you know,
Probably B as well.
oh yeah, and B, yeah, B absolutely. Um, yeah, there should be once it's there, like we'll build it into update.php, but I would imagine that B's updb would also take a flag for make
Mhm.
backup or something like that. Um, just to make it so that the process of running update.php is kind of similar between B and
Mhm.
the UI. But yeah, there'd probably also be a dedicated command, um, similar to I imagine that kind of like you know, backup and migrate already provides B commands, I believe, right? That you would take those BAM commands and move them into B core as
Mhm.
just making them available. Um, I would imagine just to
Mhm.
expose those core APIs. And then yeah, this overall thing it will be really interesting once you have this backup restore functionality from like an emergency backup perspective, if that affects the usage of backup and migrate really substantially, that how many people are using backup and migrate for moving their database between environments at like for their user interface, and how many of them are doing it just because it's a user interface for restoring a backup. And if they can do that via settings.php and restore.php, if that's good enough, and if backup and migrate sees a lot of reduction in usage. It is if I'm not mistaken, our number one contrib module. So
Mhm.
yeah, that in itself is kind of a evidence that this is highly sought after functionality for our backdrop users.
Right.
Okay, well, I ran over on time. We're 5 after now. Thank you all for the discussion. I really appreciate everybody's feedback. And yeah, we'll connect again next week. I don't think that there's any big news or planning in between this week and next. So we'll just see y'all on the internet then. Okay,
Hey,
Thank you all.
you.